If you're a fan of the Life series, then you've likely seen the community talk about the lore, which has left many people confused. The reason for this is because many people don't actually know it has any kind of storyline, and to be fair, you can watch it without knowing what the lore behind it is. But if you want to know why everyone is freaking out over faint whispers in the background, or why some people are excited over this symbol showing up ever so often, then this video is for you. Quick disclaimer. I'm going to be running through mostly what we know is canon from Martin's perspective. He's described it as an alternate universe within the game, and it really has no effect on the actual game they're playing. Ultimately, the Life series remains unscripted and isn't rigged for any desired outcome. For example, there's the Canary Curse, where Solidarity dies first every game. The idea that Solidarity is scripted to die is kind of silly. But you know, since it kept happening and he kept dying first in most games, that became lore in itself. I'm so sorry. However, there are some points where it relates back to pre-existing lore, such as the secret society that was introduced in the last episode in Past Life, which was the last episode when this video was written. That's just something to keep in mind when going forward with this video. Also, if this is your first time seeing the channel, feel free to check out my other content and consider subscribing. It really helps me out in the long run. So, without further ado, let's get into it. But before we get into the Life series, we need to go back, because the Watcher lore doesn't start here. In fact, it's probably the least prominent in the Life series, a blink and you miss it kind of deal. The place where it's up front and centre was actually on the SMP that came before it. For those of you who don't know, this is the Evo symbol, and if you've watched the Life series, this may look familiar, but we'll get to that in a sec. Evo is what used to be the Evolution SMP, an SMP where they played in different versions of the game until they were allowed to go through the portal to get to the next version. There were quite a few members, but the ones from the Life series consisted of Grian, Pearl, Martin, Big B and Solidarity. The whole point was to keep the server evolving. However, whenever something went wrong or someone wasn't playing fair, their progress would be halted by the Watchers. This is where we get the most information about the Watchers. They are meant to be the overseers of the world and the players. We kind of get the idea that they're meant to represent the viewers, overwatching their every move. Based on the statues, we understand that they are these towering creatures with wings that suggest they are some sort of angelic being. However, as time went on, we start to get the idea that the Watchers were way more sinister than they were kind. Now, after the Ender Dragon was defeated separately by each of the members and they went through the final portal, instead of Minecraft's typical credits, we saw a conversation between two of the Watchers, discussing all the good and the bad things that happened on the server. They talk about the fact that the portal will be changing their world, and for their final departure, the Watchers decided to make Grian one of them. Grian bids his farewell to the other players and leaves, while the rest of them are forced out of their homes to start anew. Watchers even wrecking their bases so that they would have to leave. However, when they go out to clear their homes, they are introduced to the listeners via book, a group of people that were against the Watchers' decision. By the end of the series, it seems that when they left the server, they were free from the Watchers. Or so they thought. Cut to the Life series, or at this point it was Third Life, a new series created by Green with a bunch of Minecraft YouTubers where they were given 3 lives each and they needed to see who survived the longest. Greens and yellows were neutral, while reds became hostile and were allowed to kill other players. Some of the players you would recognise from the Evo SMP, along with some other incredible YouTubers. And while everyone was starting their season completely oblivious to what could have been going on in the background, Martin was dealing with something else. From my understanding, the lore started in the Life series in Third Life, a season where Martin begins to act differently. He plays the game the same as everyone else, but in his videos there seems to be something more going on. In Martin's videos, he starts talking to these people that seem to know a lot more about what's going on and has guided him on what to do on the server, although soon he quickly realises that these people aren't on his side. But then we start to learn more about these mysterious voices, especially in Last Life. Martin brings up the fact that he knows them and asks why they aren't rhyming, to which they respond quite bitterly, essentially calling him too dumb to understand. Ouch. Now, Martin could have been referring to the times where they talked in earlier sessions, or it could either be the Watchers or the listeners. both speak in rhymes. Now, initially, I was leaning more towards this being the listeners. It makes more sense because Martin had more of a connection with the listeners and they had asked him to work with them. But then I thought more about what they were saying. They sounded like they were mocking Martin for being a listener. And they said that they didn't have to speak in rhymes anymore because there was no one around to listen. These aren't the listeners that were on his side before, these are the watchers speaking to him. And from the sounds of it, they've succeeded in taking the listeners away from the players. Essentially, after Evo ended, it was because the members had tried to escape the grasp of the Watchers. In order to keep the players in check, the Watchers created this game that they can't escape from, effectively trapping these members in a continuous cycle where they kill each other over and over, feasting on the emotion that comes from it, particularly the betrayals, which is where you'll see the new elements such as the boogeyman or the more recent secret society being added. It's entertainment for the Watchers. It's what keeps themselves saturated. Martin was the one tormented by the fact he could hear them because he's a listener, which makes the Watchers decide to mess around with him, promise him that he'll see the end only to take it away, order him to kill different members just because they could. Through Martin, we hear the Watchers' demands, their anger when the game doesn't go their way, and their bitterness towards someone who shouldn't have been in the games in the first place. He was only meant to watch. In Grian's final episode of Evo, he became a Watcher, and Watchers are only meant to sit back and observe their worlds. But Grian doesn't do this. He plays the game along with the rest of his friends. However, it makes sense that he still has a slight advantage, since this is his series, but also because he's a Watcher. He's able to know about the concepts of the boogeyman and the secret society before playing, as well as the little gimmicks that could come into play later on within the game. However, one could argue that Grian could still be considered the enemy as a Watcher, and the reason that they're trapped in the games in the first place, despite the fact that he's in there as well. Is Grian still working with the Watchers, or is he against them? And should Martin, as a listener, be working against him along with the other players? Side note, after Third Life, we saw Martin floating in a void, which makes you wonder, is this what's really happening? Did the big escape from the Evo server leave them floating in a comatose state, where they're constantly being pulled back and forth between life and death just to keep the Watchers entertained? This is a popular theory that's being spread throughout the Watcher lore fans, but so far we haven't had any confirmation on the fact, although it does kind of explain how the games work. I just wanted to add this in there because I thought it was a cool theory and I thought it should be included. Anyway, as the seasons progress, we start to see a bit more of the Watcher lore being added, and I would say that this did peak in Secret Life, where not only did we see the Evo symbol, it really pushed the narrative of a society of people who assigned each of the members roles and tasks and secrets to keep in order to create conflict and pain which they can feed on. This is where we started hearing the whispers and how they've come again in Past Life, a series that is significantly similar to Evo down to the concept and the opening. As time progresses, we are under the impression that more players are being affected by the storyline. More and more are distrusting their environment, questioning the whispers, confused about the society. And if there was ever a point where they could possibly bring the Watchers back, I would think that Past Life would be the best option. But what do you guys think? Are we on something here? Thank you guys so much for watching. These videos are always fun for me to make, so it's great to know that you guys enjoy them as well. Thank you to my members. Once again, your support for this channel is why I can continue to make videos, and I appreciate it so much. But if you can't be a member, that's okay. I'm so thankful to everyone who subscribed. Thank you, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!